I'm going to introduce you to my collection. My name's Linda Starr, and I've also been a life member of the Sedona Heritage Museum for almost 25 years. I belong to Questers, which is an antique club, and it's international, and I've been a member since 1968. And I've lived in Sedona permanently since 99, although we built the house in 91 and I came up here all the time from Scottsdale, Paradise Valley area. I got to tell you how I got into this wonderful collection. I had this friend and her name was Jean Bright Halls. And she was from Hocking County, Ohio. And she came to Scottsdale in the 1980s, and we got to be friends, and she had this wonderful button collection. And she went around and talked to Questers and different places who would like to hear about her collection. And she had been collecting since 1942, but she received the buttons from her aunt, who was born in the 1870s, and she had started collecting all these wonderful buttons. Most of these buttons are Victorian, 1890s. But then Jean had moved to Connecticut, and in 2004, Jean passed away. And about 2 weeks later, in the mail came these big boxes. And you know what Dale said, my husband said? He says, "What did you order now, Linda?" And of course it was my buttons that I had gotten. So this is how I got started. I have these wonderful things, and I've given several talks on my buttons. So I want to tell you about the buttons a little bit. The buttons started in about the 12th century, and they were worn mostly by men. And they were made of gold and precious jewels and ivory and porcelain and tortoise shells and paper and potatoes, butterfly wings, and feathers. The black buttons, I have to tell you right away, and I can show you some of these. These black buttons became very, very popular during Victorian days, and that was because of Queen Victoria. In 1861, Prince Albert died, and Queen Victoria went into mourning for almost 9-10 years. And she wore black jet buttons on her clothes. And that's how they became so popular all over the world. In 1864, buttons appeared in Godey magazine, and they were picture buttons. And I have a picture button here. It is just really of a lovely lady, and right in here. I don't have many, but just that one is really nice. During the Civil War, gold buttons and silver buttons were melted down. And you know, an interesting thing too about buttons, Navajo Indians used the buttons as currency. And during the Victorian era, buttons became decorated and ornate subject matter taken from castles. And I have several here of the castles, of different castles. And heroes and nursery rhymes were also very popular in a lot of these buttons. Mythology and nature. And I mean, whatever they could think of, a lot of the animals, insects. I mean, there's some insects that are just, I wouldn't even think of putting it on a button. Well, grasshoppers for one. It's just interesting how they took different things and made them into buttons. Another wonderful button of that era was the gay 90s. And right here are the gay 90s. I just love these. These are my favorite button. They have like imitation jewels. They're not real jewels, but they're real pretty with the red and the blue and really nice buttons. And another thing that happened, plastic and celluloid came into to being, and it was a substitute for ivory. And an American billiard ball manufacturer, he advertised, "I will give $10,000 to anyone who could create something that looks like ivory." And John Wesley Hyatt invented celluloid. And many buttons are made out of celluloid. And these are my celluloid buttons that I do have. And they look like, you know, plastic, but they are celluloid. Another thing was the charms. And I have to tell you about this. Known as a charm string. And what the gals would do, they would start stringing buttons, and they'd have their friends come and bring a button and come over and bring a button and put it on the string. And when they got to be 999, I have to show you what, 999, then 1,000 would be Prince Charming would arrive. And he would bring it, and then they would be wed. That was the story. And so they were the first really button collectors, was these young gals who would have these on their string. And they kept a needle on the very end of it, so the person who brought the button could put it on there for her. And I think that's sort of fun. And this is really the string. The only thing is, I have restrung these buttons because the threads were falling off, but it was really, I thought, oh, it's worth restringing. So it took me half a day the other day, and I decided to do it. Another thing, these are interesting too, buttons. They're Japanese, and they're called Japanese mask. And they're all individual little heads on there. And I looked them up the other night to find out what they're worth. One of these are worth about $219. So I have 3 of them. So that's exciting to find out that they're worth that much. Also, when it comes to the workman's buttons, I have to tell you a little bit about those. These are, let's see, where are they? Okay, here, we'll just do these first. These are the army buttons. These are all army buttons in here. And then, the other ones are the train and the, anything that was working, they would have some clothes that would have buttons on it and represent what they were doing. Here's one I found was very interesting, is a post office. They all had buttons on their clothes, and it says post office on it. Another one of work buttons are these, and they're just different kinds. And there's a big 3, and also a Texaco. And I think I know somebody who would really like that button. And that's Victoria Clark's husband, Mike. He likes anything to do with oil. All right, and these are interesting too. Here are some fire department buttons. And the Navy buttons, and they all have, you know, like anchors on them, and they're very nice. Another button that was made was out of wood. And here's one with a bird and heads of things, and like a butterfly. And the Liberty head here was made in 1851. So they made things, buttons out of everything. All right, another interesting, here are all flowers and trees and buttons with things on there. And I can't believe how they just used everything they could think of to put onto buttons. And also the different mythology. And, a lot of dragons, too. There are a lot of dragon buttons. And here is a little child and it shows a cherub in a leaf. Then I have the little glass buttons also that are really nice. And here, these are really beautiful buttons too, the pearl and shell buttons. So there's just so many, you can sit and spend days and then looking them up. Also, I have several books that I call the Bible, and it was written in 1985, and it's really the greatest book. There are books the book has pages of nothing but buttons, and they're all identified, and of course, since it was written in 1985, it has prices on it, but the prices, of course, have changed today. Oh, and I wanted to explain, too, another thing about buttons. I put these are just little buttons in this little jar. You can decorate with buttons so much. If you notice, I have a necklace on that I put together, and I love this necklace. I also have a bracelet that Dawn Burshader put this together for me, and it's like ruby buttons. Of course, they're not real, but they look really nice. Another thing is the little heart. Someone gave me this, and it's all of the white shells like. This one here I found very interesting too. These are China buttons, and they're stenciled, and they're the late 1800s, 1900s. They're very, very pretty. They're called also calico buttons. But then this button, these are nice too. I love these glass paperweight buttons. As I said, Dawn Burshader, I'm sure would like these. I'm not going to give them to her though, because she does the paperweights, and she did it at one of the talks. Also, a lot of these buttons are just, so different. You have to look close. Now, they have turned color a little bit, and you can use a little vinegar to clean them with a brush. You're not supposed to use heavy soap or anything like that, because it does take away from the buttons. Now, I said what you can use your buttons for to do things and make. I put this together. This is my husband's father, and in this picture, and he was 5 months old. And I thought this represents all these old buttons too. And he was born in, I believe, 1902, 1903. Another great one is the silver steel buttons. As I say, buttons were made out of everything. And these are shiny and pretty, all different types. So then we go to the miniatures. Now these are really hard to even thread, put on a needle, go through to put them on. I don't know how they did that, but must have been on for women's clothes. Very, very small. But as I say, a lot of men in the 1800s and the 1700s, they would wear maybe on their clothing, there'd be 12 to 20 buttons on their coats and everything. I put this one out with red because it's near Valentine's Day. And it shows celluloid and plastic, mostly celluloid buttons here. A lot of these buttons I have cleaned a little bit, but most of them are the original, how I received them. But All the buttons are just worthwhile. Oh, also I wanted to show a picture too. Different ways you could use your buttons. You could put them on shoes across. This has been done like that. And also, I also wanted to show you a nice picture here. This is the gal that I received all the buttons from. And I have all her information, everything. So I've taken a lot of it to do my talks. But this was Jean Halls, and a great lady. And she died at the age of 94, as they say in Connecticut. And I wanted to show you one more. This was the book I was talking about. This is called The Big Book of Buttons. And boy, if you really are into buttons, you got to have this book. And it's just wonderful. I don't even know if you can still get it or not. But it has wonderful pictures and identified with everything. I also have some small ones. This one here I really like because it has all the soldiers' buttons that they wore. And this is the one I have a lot of, the Army in 1902, World War I in 1918. So I have a lot of those. But it's fun to look at these books and identify when you have a lot of buttons. This one here, of course, is the Navy, and I have that one. There's one that shows a bigger picture. They're awfully hard to see, and I know. I hope you're enjoying, even though you can't see them that well. But here's something that one of my friends did for me, and it's a ball, and you can hang it like anywhere, but it could be hung on a Christmas tree. And I love this one too. So there's so many ways that you could use the buttons, and as I say, I wear this one. A lot of my friends probably have seen this. I think I've shown you most of the buttons and talked about. This is the opalescent button. I don't know, and I don't know too much about this button. I have not been able to find too much. I don't even know what year they came out. So it could have been in the 30s or the 20s. I don't know for sure. But most of them, as I've told you, are of the 1800s that I have. Like all of these are 1800 here. And the Army buttons, there are different eras there of that. So I wanted also, I don't know too much more about to tell you, but also here's hand-painted buttons too. I don't think I told you anything about those. These are really pretty. There's some enameled. These are enameled, some of these up here. But these are really pretty buttons. They look like, you really look like the late 1890s again. A lot of women hand-painted ceramics and things, then they did their own buttons too, if they were good painters. Well, I think I've given you a tour of my buttons, and I hope you've enjoyed this. And there's so many things, there's so many buttons. And, oh, you're probably wondering, I'm going to tell you, where in the name of sense does she keep all these buttons? Well, my grandmother had an old trunk, a big old trunk. And guess what? That's where I keep the buttons. I have to put them, I put them in boxes, and they're all labeled, of course, but I keep them in that, and it has a tray, and it's one of those humpback, I'm trying to think. Anyway, it's humpback one, but it has the tray, so I can lift the tray out with the buttons. And so it's a little chest, but it's big enough for all my buttons, so that's where I keep them. So I thought I'd tell you. You probably were wondering. I hope I've answered anything that could be asked, but anyway, I'm glad that I could give a talk today. Thank you for listening.